Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well this morning and you can all hear me. We're going to get started. And I just wanted to say good morning and welcome to When the Kids Come Back. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Englander, and I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State University. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Everyone, please be sure that your device or laptop or computer is muted so that we don't have feedback or any other problems like that. You should be automatically muted just in case. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I just want to say, first of all, that we had really an overwhelming response to this webinar. And when I first had the idea to put it up, I sort of threw it out. I really didn't think about a lot of the details in advance way back when I had this thought a couple months ago. But as I've thought more and more about it, I think that it's a very difficult issue. And I think that there is a lot that we're going to need to cope with in the fall. So I want to let you know that we have the webinar here today. We're going to put a recording of it up online, although obviously people who watch the recording won't be able to ask questions. And I'm also going to put up a written version of it for those of you who would rather just read something quickly rather than sit through a webinar, which I completely understand. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Here's what I'm going to go through today. First thing is there's a few logistics I want to be clear on. I want to talk about what we're dealing with and what the issues seem to be, what the research tells us, and there is research that we can use that will help us prepare. There has been research on this particular pandemic, and there's been research done on previous natural disasters where kids have been out of school for extended periods of time, and I'm going to be drawing those together. I'll tell you more about them briefly. Then I'm going to talk about a few general principles, and I'm going to spend most of the time today talking about very concrete actions, things that we can all do. And we're going to separate this out by like a to-do list. So I'm going to talk about what we could do this summer, what we could do right before the start of school, and what we can do when school actually starts. And I'm going to separate these out by the different roles that we play. So I'm going to talk about what administrators can do, what school counselors and counseling staff can do, and what teachers and classroom teachers can do, because I really see these roles as very different in helping the kids and understanding where they're going to be at when they come back to school. I do want to point out that notes are going to be available at the end. We're going to have the written form. We're going to have the recorded form. We can send out notes. So you don't have to sit here and scribble down ideas. You can relax and drink your coffee and just watch the webinar, and that's fine. If you have questions during today's webinar, we will be taking questions live as the webinar is going on. So Dr. Megan McCoy is with us, and she is going to field all the questions so that I can focus on disseminating the information. So how you do this is click on a little purple thing in the lower right-hand corner. It looks kind of like a purple thumb. And then once you click on it, a window opens, and you can click on the chat icon. Then you'll be asked if you want it for a particular person or if you just want to send this to everyone. You can just click on everyone. That's the easiest thing to do. You don't have to enter anything in that search box. Just click on everyone. That's really all you have to do. We're also going to take questions at the end. So if you'd prefer to listen and save your questions, that's totally fine, and we'll take your questions. But if you have a question while the webinar is going on, Megan McCoy is going to be able, Dr. McCoy is going to be able to answer them for you. Today, I'm going to give you a lot of suggestions. Basically, what I did is I tried to brainstorm anything that might help in this situation. And I brainstormed and organized, but I want to emphasize that even though I'm going to be giving you like laundry lists of things you can do, I'm not suggesting that everybody has to do all of these things. You know your school community, you know the people you work with, and you're going to make judgments about what's going to work and what's not going to work. And that's completely fine. So I really want to emphasize that this is just sort of a cafeteria style webinar. Take what's useful and leave what's not useful, and that's fine. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to do everything. Some of the suggestions you're going to hear today are very simple. Some of them are going to involve more work. So I encourage you not to shy away from that. I know that the beginning of the school year, a lot of work in a normal year. I do think this year is going to be quite different. And I think we're going to have to put in a little bit of extra time and effort. Okay. So let's begin by looking at what we're dealing with. What are the issues that we're dealing with? I'm going to start off today by sort of talking about the bad news. We have sort of a trifecta of stress and possibly trauma. We have the coronavirus and the pandemic and the social isolation that accompanied that. Parents having to work, stay home, and take care of their children and teach their children simultaneously. We have the recession. So we have parents who have lost jobs. We have families who have lost homes. We have kids who are going to be food insecure coming to school more than before, and that's going to be an issue. Then we have social unrest. And social unrest is substantially different from the other two in that it's not designed, it's not like a natural disaster or a disaster that has just hit the United States. It's an attempt to improve our society, but it's change. And I think one of the principles of child development that's really important to remember is that change can be anxiety provoking for kids, whether it's change for something better or change for something worse. Really big changes can be anxiety provoking. And so I think that's one of the things that's important to keep in mind. All right, what are the immediate consequences for kids? So we have financial stress, right? The kids might have lost their home, they might have moved, their parents might be employed. We have medical stress. The kids may have lost a family member. They may have seen somebody they're close to be sick, get very sick, or even, hopefully not, but even die. There's the medical stress of sort of, what's out there. The virus. This is interesting. This popped up in a couple of the pieces of research that, kids feel a lot of anxiety and fear about the virus, this thing that's out there that's threatening them. And I can see how that would make a child fearful. Then you have all the stress of sort of the social upheaval. And again, even though ultimately the social upheaval may result in a much better society, I think it will, there is still stress. So they might have seen unrest in the neighborhood. They might have seen scary images, destruction on television or in the news. They might have had family members or friends who they know who have been arrested or have been injured or harmed in these uprisings. And so all of that can be a source of anxiety for children. Now, these are very serious challenges, but I really think that there are ways to cope with it. And that's really what I want to focus on today, is understanding the problem and then thinking about how we're actually going to cope with this. What are we going to do? And those of you who are familiar with my work know that I emphasize really concrete and practical solutions, and this is no exception. I am going to talk about this. My field obviously is more in social and emotional learning, so that's where I'm going to be focusing most of my efforts today. I'll talk a little bit about academics and how that will affect children's anxiety and their their reentry into school as well, though. Okay, so let's look first at the research on the impact of this. What do we know about the impact of the last couple of months on children, particularly children in the United States, but that's not where all the research has gone on. So there has been research that's gone on during the current pandemic. Researchers have looked at parents in the United States. They've surveyed or looked at children in China and seeing how they are functioning. They've looked at data from abuse records and hotlines. They've looked at children's mental health and how kids are coping with this emotionally and psychologically, both in Europe and in the United States. Then there is previous research, and I'm going to tell you honestly, there's not a lot of this, but there is some research on specifically not just on children's functioning following natural disasters, but their return to school and how that was handled after prolonged absences. So for example, there was research done in Louisiana where children were out of school for months because of repeated hurricanes. And how did their reentry to school go? What were their behaviors? What did they struggle with? What helped the school help them? And I think that that's very useful information. So I'll show you what they found, basically. So here's what we know. We know we have academic challenges, right? We know that we are looking at summer loss times 2 or times 3. It's going to be magnified this year, obviously. But not just that, the kids are sort of all in different places academically. The kids all did varying amounts of work while they were in isolation or in quarantine with their parents. We're going to get a mixed bag. Classrooms are set up certain expectations. Some kids exceeded those expectations. Some kids went nowhere near them. You may have read in the news media that there were a number of reports of parents just giving up, finding that it was too difficult to help their kids do their schoolwork and maintain their own jobs, and they simply gave up. On the other hand, there are kids whose parents have been absolutely on top of it. You know, they may have gone beyond it. They may have gotten curricula for themselves. We actually put out our curricula for parents to use. That's the first time we've ever done that, and you know, it's important to understand that. Okay, what about the actual research on whether or not they've done their schoolwork? There's a little bit done on this. So parents reported on the average that children did 4.2 hours of schoolwork per day in the United States. That's the average. It strikes me as a little optimistic, but maybe not. Maybe not. However, that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is that 22% of the kids in this survey did less than 1 hour per day. And if you look only at the children who didn't have reliable broadband access, then what you find, 45% did 1 hour or less per day. So I think that means that we are going to have a significant pool of children who have done little work during this break. Learning Heroes did a study on sort of how parents were coping with all of this. And they found a couple things. One of the things that is good is they found that parents are reporting feeling more activated, more involved in their children's schoolwork than they've ever been. Now that they're the teachers, they find themselves really, really involved. Interestingly, and maybe not too surprisingly for those of you who are familiar with this, but parents tended to overestimate their child's readiness and their child's academic ability. And I think that's normal. I think that's normal. It's good news. It's sort of good news and bad news. You know, 75% of them were hopeful that reentry into school could be managed that the kids could all be evened up at some point, and 65% of them said they were quite worried or anxious about what was going to happen. And so a significant number of them are really, really quite concerned. So what are they concerned about? So here are the top things that parents are anxious about. Now, there's a reason I'm going over this, and that's because I think that in the fall, parental anxiety is one of the things that we as educators are going to have to deal with. I think that's going to be an issue. So it's good to know what they're anxious about. What are they actually anxious about? Their top worries, their kids socializing or lack of socializing, how the kids are going to get together socially and how that's going to work. That has to do with problems like bullying or cyberbullying that may have occurred during term. Of course, the coronavirus and, infection and exposure and, who gets sick and who doesn't. And then just the kids being on track academically. So I think this is very predictable. This didn't surprise me at all that these were their top worries. I think that's to be expected. A few quick points. California survey was done in April on parents, and parents were worried about their kids falling behind academically. Excuse me. Suburban parents were the most worried. Really, parents in general were worried. Parents of special needs kids were a little more worried than the average, which I think makes sense. Other parental concerns were things like parents worried about financial things, which is to be expected, I think. They worried about the child being bored at home. They worried about whether the child was on track academically and was going to go to college and graduate and that kind of thing. Parents were also very anxious about financial issues. And this is very notable. 30% of parents in this sample, in this US sample, were worried about food stability. And 40% were worried about being able to pay the bills. This is quite a large chunk of the population. So I really think that we have to be very sensitive to this because I think that even in very affluent districts, we're going to see parents who are worried about a change in their financial status. Even in very affluent schools, I don't think any school is going to get away with having parents who are not worried about this. Here's the good news. I thought this was great. Parents are showing new appreciation for you, for educators and for teachers, now that they have tried to teach their kids. They're really showing appreciation, which is nice to see. 2/3 of them, say they appreciate teachers more. They have a deeper connection. About 95% of the teachers in this study, in the Learning Heroes study, said they had heard from their child's teacher, which is good. But only 33% said that they were in touch regularly. And there were racial differences in that number, which are concerning. If everybody hopes that this is only a one-wave pandemic, but if we go back into a second wave and we have to leave again, I think we all have to be very, very aware of that discrepancy and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Okay. How have the last few months affected kids psychologically and emotionally? So it's a very interesting study that was done in China. And what they did is they compared children in grades 2 to 6 in March. So it was pretty early on in the pandemic. So whatever they found, I think, is probably less than they would have found if they had done it in May. But what they did is they compared children in 2 towns, Wuhan and Huangxi. And the difference is both towns were isolated and put into shutdown. However, Wuhan was much more badly affected by the virus. So what they found overall is that children showed many more depressive symptoms than they had before the pandemic had occurred. So before the pandemic, depressive symptoms were measured at about 17% of kids, and this measured up to 27% in Wuhan and up to 20% in Huangxi. But I think that what's really interesting about this study is that in Wuhan, children would have seen more people who were sick. They probably would have heard more about this virus, and that may be the factor that made them feel really anxious. Now, Save the Children also did a survey in April of 2,000 families and more. Actually, these surveys were done both in the United States and in Europe. During the lockdown, they talked about 17% feeling depressed often or always. That's not way off from the Chinese study. It may be a little lower. It may be a different sample, or it may be that, for example, the virus was not quite as bad in Europe and the United States as it was in China. But more of them were feeling anxious, which I think makes a lot of sense. And 32% of them were struggling to sleep. And I think one of the things we're going to have to look for, and this is actually mirrored in the research on past natural disasters, is that it's not unusual to see problems in things like sleeping and eating in children when they go through these kinds of events. About 30% of them feared the virus, and that's completely consistent with everything else that we're seeing in the research. One of the more disturbing things that's happened is increase in reports to child abuse hotlines and measurements. Now, it is important to remember that anything that puts stress on families increases the rates of child abuse. So, for example, the recession in 2008, you saw increases then too. Any natural disaster, any financial disaster, anything that stresses families causes increases in child abuse. And this situation is no exception. So in Texas, case trends, admissions were about 2 to 3 times higher for child abuse. Those would have been very serious kinds of child abuse because they necessitated a hospital admission. In New York, they saw domestic violence cases double. And I think one of the more disturbing ones is the sexual abuse hotlines reported very big increases, 22% increases in monthly calls from children who were reporting that they were being sexually abused in their home and most of the time they reported it was by a family member who was in their home. And the sexual abuse hotline research, which I discuss in more detail in the written version of this information, is pretty surprising and quite a change from what we usually see. Screen time changes. This will come as no surprise to anybody who works with kids or who has kids. The average screen time in the United States in the Parents Together survey done in late April is that screen time doubled, that many children had 6 to 8 hours, and that much of it was unsupervised. And parents in past research on supervision, parents tend to overestimate their supervision anyway, so it's very likely that a lot of this was unsupervised. What about bullying and fighting between kids? There's actually been no real research done on this during the pandemic. I think people were more concerned with other issues, but there have been anecdotal reports that there's been a great deal of cyberbullying going on between kids. Because these problems, because these social stressors between kids are predominantly happening online in digital environments, what we're going to see when the kids come back is we're going to see a lot of situations that began as misunderstandings or misinterpretations and sort of evolved into fighting or bullying online. That seems very likely just because we know that a lot of online issues begin in that way. The kids are going to run the gamut. There's going to be some kids who are going to come back and they're just going to be itching to fight. They're going to have had conflict and problems online, and they're just going to really want to get in there and find those kids that are giving them a problem. Other kids are not going to be paying much attention to it. Other kids are really going to be looking at social problems. Other issues were much more serious. Maybe they had somebody who died or who became very sick and that frightened them. Maybe they, have severe financial problems in their family and they're not going to be thinking about it so much. So it's going to kind of run this gamut. What about bias and discrimination? So there's two issues that seem front and center. One is bias against Asian Americans, as though they were responsible for this. And about 30% of people are saying that they witnessed bias against Asian Americans as a result of this pandemic. Then, of course, you have all the issues around bias and racism that have really come to the forefront because of the social movement following the death of George Floyd. And that means that your students are going to be newly sensitized to these issues. Every community and every institution, my institution, your institution, everyone is going to have to look at itself and really examine if there's any systemic racism or discrimination and work to alleviate that. Okay, so in summary, what are the psychological challenges we're facing? We're looking at an increase in screen time, right? And that may mean a decrease in social skills because, as we know, the only way to build social skills in children is with face-to-face interaction with peers. And children have not had face-to-face interaction with peers for the most part for quite a long time. Now, if they have that kind of interaction, they have that kind of interaction in the summer, they might regain some of that ground. We really don't know, though, what the summer is going to look like, do we? We really have no idea. Vegetative functioning, so we may see problems with sleeping and eating. These are very common when children go through this kind of trauma, and it's not unexpected at all. Then we're going to see social problems like kids bullying each other or experiencing racism or discrimination or confronting that issue in ways that are anxiety provoking for kids. We may very well, I'm certain we're going to see increases in anxiety and depression. There will be some children who have been traumatized by this. It's not going to be all children by a long shot, but there are going to be some, and we need to be prepared for that. We may see increases in child abuse. The indications suggest that probably is going to be what's going to go on. And we should expect sort of a variety of psychological and behavioral reactions to this. So I'm going to talk more about this later, but one of the things that we know from past research is that when kids come back to school, they behave about these problems, the pandemic and the recession, they behave about these issues in different ways. They react to them in school in different ways. And so we sort of need to be prepared for those differences. Okay. Almost done with the problems. I know it's a lot. This is a daunting task, you can tell. So now we have your faculty and your staff, and they are human beings as well. And they've had some loss and they've had some trauma. They may have financial problems. Even if they're still working at your school, their spouse may have lost their job or their partner may have lost their job. They know they're going to have to deal with these kids who have problems, and they're not therapists, they're teachers. And this is daunting. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that we need to help teachers and staff feel as good as they can feel in doing this. Then you have logistics. You have all the changes in logistics. And that means things like how are little kids going to react to coming to school and maybe having to wear a mask or having a teacher who's wearing a mask? The change in logistics is going to cause changes in the kids as well. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Okay, so here's a boiled down list of how everything, things that are going to be different for everyone without exception this fall. The first difference is academic expectations. We're all going to have to dial them back, especially at first. We're going to all have to get used to different routines, right? It's probably going to mean fewer transitions. It's probably going to mean, we're all going to have to get used to things like lunch in the classroom or changes like that. There are going to be new rules. And we have to think about how we're going to enforce those rules and how we're going to handle it when we run into resistance. And then finally, I really do think the social and emotional stuff is going to be front and center this fall. I know that because of the nature of my business, where I go out schools working on social and emotional stuff, I know that there are many people or some people in education who feel already that there's too much focus on social and emotional functioning. Whether you believe that or not, I think it's going to be right up there. I don't think it's going to be avoidable for any of us this fall. Okay. So the job of the moment, we have to prepare for kids with a variety of academic levels. We have to prepare for kids with a variety of emotional reactions. We have to re-examine our school's systemic biases. We have to help support faculty and staff. We have to help support parents and families. And we are going to have to revise all of our logistics to live with COVID-19. And that's it, right? So I'm being facetious, but obviously that's a big list. That's a big list. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to start focusing on what it is we actually need to do. Okay, so let's begin with the summer. Talking about what you're going to be doing during the rest of June, July, and August. And I'm going to begin by talking about what administrators and counseling staff can do over the summer. Prepare. We are going to have a video. Excuse me. We're going to have a video that you can access on the MARC website that is going to talk to parents about how to promote their child's mental health. It's not yet, but it will be there. And there won't be any cost for it or anything. And so it'll be free. And you can point parents towards that. I think I'm going to recommend a lot of videos if you feel comfortable doing that. And if you don't, I have alternatives. But, it's hard to get people to read anything nowadays, as you all know. And we all know this in education. And kids are now so accustomed to absorbing information from videos that I think it can be useful. So I think the first thing that we should do is we should have a video from the principal to the kids. And you can make it this summer. Just 2 minutes, just saying, I'm Ms. So-and-so, and I can't wait to see you. I'm really excited about the school year. I'm really excited to meet all the kids and to meet everybody. And we're really looking forward to everybody coming back. Then I think there should be a video from the counseling and psychological staff. I think they should introduce themselves. I think they should say, this is how you can contact me. Remember, the parents are probably going to watch these videos too. The counseling and psychological staff are really going to be important this fall. So your counseling staff is going to be at the center of the school. And I think that if they make a video introducing themselves, then, that will be very helpful. Okay, then you have to talk about logistics and anxiety planning. And I'm putting these two together for a reason. So you're thinking about all the logistics, right? The schedules, the class size, the desk seating, the hallway transitions, all the different logistics. But you also have to think about anxiety. So for example, you may get to the point where public health experts in your state or you feel like it's safe to have assemblies. But if assemblies are going to make kids or parents extremely anxious, then you should consider that when you're deciding whether or not to have them, at least at the beginning, I think. Parental anxiety and the anxiety of kids around this virus is still going to be real. And you have to take into account that even if you make decisions, they can't all be based strictly on safety. You do have to take into account how anxious people are going to feel. Okay, another thing you want to do is you want to prepare a document that I am calling, for lack of a better word, the parent's quick reference handout. And this document is going to basically have 2 sections. The first section is talking about what's going to be new in school. So for example, we're going to eat lunch in the classroom. We're not going to do any assemblies. There's going to be fewer transitions. We're going to do single file lines in the hallways. They're going to be masks. Everyone's going to be required to wear masks. There are going to be new rules, and here are the consequences if these rules aren't followed. So I think it's really important to know that just a summary of what's going to change. The second part of the parent's quick reference handout is contact us. So if your child is having an emotional meltdown, if they feel really anxious, if they seem depressed, if you need help with them emotionally or psychologically, here's our counseling staff and here's their phone number. If you need information about where to do the school drop-off or what time your child is supposed to start, here's the phone number for the school secretary or whoever it is you designate to answer questions, and you're going to want to designate somebody. If you want information about your state, so for example, if you're in Massachusetts and you wanted, information about the current level of COVID-19, then you would go to the website, the Massachusetts state website, and you can put in your state's website too. The idea is that it's like a one-page quick reference handout. Here's what's new, and here's who you can contact with their phone numbers. And you're going to use this document a lot, I think, as time goes on. Okay, whoever you designate to answer your phone calls about this, and then I think they're going to need an FAQ. So what you want to do is you want to try to anticipate some of the questions parents will have. And these, could be questions like, where is the drop-off, and what time does my child come, and how are you going to keep them from getting infected? Just try to anticipate common questions and give the person who answers the phone a sheet of paper that has the answers, so that they're not always having to send these people to somebody else. They can just answer these questions right there. They have the information. Also, the person who answers the phone should be able to email the parent questions handout to any quick information, the thing I just talked about. They should be able to email the handout to any parent who calls. If they have questions, they may just say, give me your email address. I'm going to send it to you right now. Okay. In addition to the handout, I think that you should begin working on a letter to parents. And the letter is what I call the plan. The plan is a little bit different. It's not what's different in school and here's who to call like the handout is. The plan basically says, look, the kids are going to be in different places academically. We know this. We know we're going to try to assess them over the summer, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. But please cooperate with the assessment if you can. We're aware that some of the kids are going to be struggling emotionally. We're aware of this. And we're prepared to help. This is our counseling staff. I think the letter should point out to parents that we're going to be very careful about exposure to COVID-19, but there are no guarantees in life. And, we're all going to be careful, and we're going to do our best to reduce risk and exposure. So we may do things like say, you need to wear a mask, or we're not going to have assemblies, etc. There's going to be new rules and that kind of stuff. I think the plan should also say that, like everybody else today in America, we are re-examining our school culture and our policies, and we want to help address systemic racism and bias. And I think you should finish up the here's the plan letter by saying, look, everybody needs to be patient and help us out here. Nobody's ever had to deal with this situation before. And we're going to ask you to be patient with us. Help us if you think that we're not doing something right. We'll listen to you, and hopefully we'll be able to address your concerns. We're really going to do our best, but we need you to do our best. You to do your best as well. Okay. I think you should put up a page on your school website that has all this information. And I think that would be very, very useful. This web page and website can really be helpful, because the more people who can get this online, those are all phone calls that you're not going to have to field. And of course, as we all know, the principal that you do in schools is you try to get information out to parents lots of different ways. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about that administrators and counseling staff can do is they can consider setting sort of a buddy system for faculty and staff. Now, I can understand that there would be resistance to this, but hear me out, and I'm going to explain why I recommend this. The idea of a buddy system is that you have one-on-ones or sort of small groups of faculty and staff. And the goal is for them to just support and check in with each other over the summer, to ask how things are going and how they're preparing and how they're feeling about things and how they're doing personally, if they want to talk about that kind of thing. In research on these issues, the single biggest help psychologically for faculty and staff was this buddy system. That was the single most helpful thing that faculty talked about, and that really helped them. You're going to have some faculty or staff who are going to say, oh, I have a buddy or I have a friend that I'm already in contact with, and that's completely fine. That's completely fine. But you can also say to your faculty and staff, there may be ones that are new or that don't have particular friends. You could say, look, if you feel unsure who might be a good buddy, then we'll assign you one, and that's fine. This has to be strictly voluntary. It has to be, you use it only if it helps. You can let faculty and staff know that research suggests that this really is helpful. And one of the things that sometimes I think I would say to faculty and staff in this situation is, look, even if you feel like this won't help you, if you are willing to help some of your colleagues, then participating in this might help them, and that might be something you're willing to do. Okay. Continuing on the to-do list for administrators, I think it's helpful to offer basic tech help to faculty. I have met, there are many faculty members who, we think of educators as being very tech savvy, but there are actually many faculty members who teach in areas that require them to be tech savvy. And they may not know how to make a video on their phone and send it, back to the school server, or post it on YouTube, or send it to students, or anything like that. And I think it would be helpful if you just put together a really simple guide. This is how you make a video on your phone, or this is how you share a photo, that kind of thing. Because I think sometimes I get the sense that educators are embarrassed when they don't know how to do this, and there's nothing to be embarrassed about, but it can be helpful. Okay, going on with the to-do list for administrators. Remember, this is all to do over the summer. Think about setting up a triage system so teachers know where to send students that they're worried about. Now, we're going to actually give you a handout. It's called Red Flags Cheat Sheet for Teachers. And basically what it does is it puts forward symptoms that teachers can notice in kids that can sort of trigger them sending the child on to counseling staff. You probably already have a system like this in your school, but I think it might be helpful to write it down and remind everybody of it, just so that people, that classroom teachers feel supported, they know who they can turn to if they're concerned about a child. We also need to anticipate some of the concerns that parents are likely to come up with. So they're likely to be worried about safety and the transmission of the virus. They may be worried about a new wave of infections or a second wave. They may be worried about their child's emotional and social functioning. They may be worried about changes in their family's financial status that might affect their child in school. They may be worried about how teachers are going to handle the kids who are at different levels academically, and how they're going to do this. And they may be worried about this and diversity and these challenges in the school community. They may be worried about the school policies around these issues, and all that is sort of to be expected. Okay, a few things just for the counseling staff and their expertise to think about over the summer. I think it would be very helpful if you develop a short checklist of sort of psychologically significant events or symptoms that parents can identify in their kids. So this would be a checklist that you're going to send home to parents in August. You're going to say, has your child shown any of these symptoms? Has any of these really significant events happened to your child during this absence? And the idea here is that by doing this, you're going to get a sense of which kids might need extra attention and a check-in, but also you're going to get a sense of how many kids. So for example, if you send out this checklist and almost none of the parents identify any problems, then you're not likely to have a significant group of kids who are going to need more assistance. But on the other hand, if lots of parents do, then you do. So it kind of lets you prepare for the fall. Other things that you can do to prepare. So put together a referral list that you can hand out to parents. And this can include things like pediatricians. It can include therapists. It can include neuropsychologists for testing. Anything that would be helpful like that. Also think of practical tips that you can offer teachers when they have behavior. Like many of you already do this all the time, and so you know this, but sort of pull together a list you could give to a teacher and say, here are some ideas of how you can handle it. When this boy becomes extremely anxious, here's something that seems to help him, and that will be helpful. Think of ways to handle what we call dwellers and avoiders. Part of the research in Louisiana found that there were types of kids that tended to emerge from natural disasters and prolonged traumas like the ones we've all been through. I'm going to call these kids sort of facetiously dwellers and avoiders, and I'm going to talk more about them when I talk about what teachers need to do. Counselors need to be prepared for them as well, and I will talk more about them because that's an important issue. Okay, excuse me. All right. Does all this seem like overkill? I want to emphasize to you that I'm not a person who thinks that adults can't be too careful. I do think that adults can be too careful, but think about what these kids have gone through. I think it really merits this level of prep. So back in March, school was abruptly terminated. This virus began, illness and death began, social isolation began. In April, then you had the recession hit, right? Job loss, the economic downturn. Some kids lost their homes. Some parents lost their jobs. Parents were very stressed. In May, there's all this research that was released on the increases in screen time and the increases in depression and fear of the virus. The recession worsened. So even people who were spared in April may have been sacked and might be very difficult. And then in the fall, these kids having gone through all this now have to turn around and go back to school. And so even though this may sort of sound like overkill. I think it's merited. I do. And remember, I'm not saying that everybody should do everything in these to-do lists. Really, it's pick and choose. Okay, so let's talk about what to do over the summer for faculty. First thing, I think you should prepare pictures, videos, and letters or emails for students. I think that these can be very helpful. I think kids need more welcoming maybe than they have in the past. And we're going to need to make a little bit more of a fuss over them. I think that keep it simple. If you're going to create a video, you can use your cell phone. Hopefully your school administration will give you a few tips on how to do that. If you don't want to be filmed, which is fine, there's other ways to do this. So you could, for example, send kids just a picture of yourself, a still photo of yourself with a voiceover. Or you could put a still photo in an email or a letter. Or the best solution if you don't want to be filmed, which is, again, completely understandable, is you can telephone your students. And in a lot of ways, that's the best solution of all, because that really allows for a one-on-one conversation. It's just a lot more work intensive, obviously, to telephone all your students. For younger students, if it's possible, it may not be possible, but if it is, try to give them clips from both teachers. The younger students had a harder time with the abrupt termination from their last year's teacher. So if they could get messages from both teachers saying, you know, we're working together, don't worry, you know, we're going to put together a great year for you, just to sort of help them make this transition from this teacher they abruptly left to their new teacher. I think that might be helpful for younger students. And you can also show kids the routines. You can say, here's where your desk is going to be. Here's what the classroom's going to look like. It's going to look different this year. Here's where your lockers are going to be. We're going to eat lunch in the classroom this year. Those kinds of things I think can be very, very helpful. You can give parents guidance, and this is, again, I think a little more pertinent for younger students, about masks. So firstly, kids should label their mask. That may sound obvious, but a lot of people won't think of it. People should label their mask, and younger kids can decorate their masks, make it theirs. Tell us to make extra masks, because masks are going to be lost and misplaced, and it's going to be like mittens, but all year long. So kids can practice wearing the mask at home so that they become comfortable with it. If they seem anxious, parents can put the mask on a sibling or on a stuffed animal to show them, you know, that it doesn't hurt. They can wear it themselves. They can let their kid examine it and everything like that. Google make a no-sew face mask. YouTube has a lot of videos on how to do this. So parents don't have to purchase masks if they're having financial issues. They can use old t-shirts to make masks. There's very easy ways to do that. I think also for younger children, and actually I think this is fairly important, it would be very helpful if the child had a picture, a photograph of their teacher with a mask and without a mask right next to each other. So I made one of myself just to give you a sense of what this might look like, so that, you know, this is what I look like and this is what I look like with a mask on. And I think that will be very helpful. There are alternatives to traditional cloth masks. Now, I'm going to caution people about this, because I don't know anything about these alternatives. I don't know if they work. I don't know if they're comfortable. I don't know if they're healthy. I'm just pointing it out that some people are beginning to come up with alternatives. So, for example, you should just do your homework if you're going to adopt one of these or recommend them. I really don't know anything about them. The buddy system, teachers, the buddy system may seem dorky. I understand that, but I really do recommend you give them a try. Even just helping colleagues, or just check in with your colleagues, because that really seems to be important. Think about developing an academic assessment. I think that is going to actually be very useful. And you might find you have a sort of bicameral effect where some kids are down here and another group of kids are up here, but that's going to help you plan for the fall. See, So I think it will be very useful. We're going to give every teacher a red flag cheat sheet looking for trauma symptoms that on our website. I'll show you how to access them. Think about class routines. Routines are going to be really important. They may be different from your classroom routines in the past, but routines, as we all know, are how children reduce anxiety. So I think it'll be very important. Think about, as a teacher, preparing some just relaxation and focus techniques. You don't have to do yoga in the classroom, but even if you just had a minute every day where you turned off the lights and you had the kids do breathing for a minute. Everything like that, we know, all the research on this shows that it helps kids focus, it helps them calm their anxiety. And here are a few websites that I found that I thought had useful and helpful exercise, ones that were practical for school settings. Okay, so now we've gone through the summer. Now it's late August. Let's talk about a little bit more of what we're going to do. This is pretty close to the beginning of school now. So you've got your assessment, right? Where it's gonna help you focus on where your class is going to be academically speaking. I think you should emphasize to kids, if you do this, that it's not going to be part of their grades. Children and their parents are already going to be quite anxious. Ask parents to monitor, but not assist. I would be sympathetic about doing this. You know, many parents have now evolved into the role of being a teacher, and it may be hard for them to sort of step back and not assist their child. If their child says, Mom, I don't know how to do this. So really encourage them. Say, listen, this is just so I get a sense of where the class is. So please do not assist your child. Please do not assist them. Oops. Okay. All right. Just got a message that the slideshow is frozen, but it looks to me like it's not. I hope it's not. Let's just see, what's going on, and hopefully it's working. Okay. Classroom teachers. I think planning for small group work is going to be very helpful at every age. You can use the results of your academic assessment to arrange the groups so that the kids who are more ahead can help you teach the kids who are less ahead. And that can sort of help in out the class a little bit in terms of where they are academically. It will also be really, really good for the kids socially to be able to, it's also really, really good for the kids to be able to see each other and begin to socialize again face to face. That's going to be kind of a transition. And it's going to promote those social connections, which are going to be really, really helpful for kids. I also think another idea that may be helpful is considering older kids work with younger kids. Now, I don't recommend you do this a lot because the older kids have their own work that they have to catch up on. However, if you can arrange this at all, it's a very positive thing to do. It helps the kids to connect across the ages. It helps the older kids because it helps them to become more conscious of being a role model. And the younger kids really get a kick out of it, and they really look up to the older kids. Research demonstrates that it improves behavior in both groups. So that's something to think about. Okay. So I know that teachers aren't therapists. I'm very conscious of this issue. And I really want to emphasize that I don't think that this fall there's going to be anything, such a thing as just teaching. I really don't. I think that you may be able to just teach, but everyone is going to have to be sort of sensitized and have their antenna up. Okay, I'm getting a message that we need to stop because the audio is working, but not the video. Could people put on the chat if they are seeing this with no problems? Oh, I see a lot of people, the slides seem to be frozen. You should be seeing a slide right now that says teachers aren't therapists. So you should be seeing a slide. I'm not sure what else we can do. I understand this. Can everybody hear? Please let me know if you can hear. Okay, so people can hear. It sounds like the audio is working, but the video has a problem. The video on my end is working quite well, but there may be a problem with the video. Okay, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to reshare, and let's see if that helps it, because it sort of seems like it may be a problem with the university. Okay, so now I stopped sharing. I'm going to reshare the content and let's see how we do. Okay. This will be available after the fact, so I want everyone to be reassured that they are going to get access to this. If there's anything they feel that they have missed, it's going to be there. Okay, so now it seems to be working. That's good news. So let's talk about how teachers aren't therapists, but there's really no such thing as just teaching in these circumstances. And I think that's very important to point out. Okay. I don't think we should expect mayhem in schools. I don't think that the kids are going to be completely freaked out, terrible behavior problems everywhere. I don't think that's going to happen, because children, generally speaking, are going to fall back into the school routine and the school milieu, and I think that's the case. However, if you end up in a situation, teachers, where you get a class that is upset. So, for example, suppose you're having a discussion, a current events discussion, and several of the kids begin to cry, or they're very upset by what's going on, or they're talking loudly. One of the best things to do is distraction. So you want to stop what's happening. You want to stop sort of the emotional train that's running with your class. And you can do that by distracting them. So flash the lights to get their attention. Over the summer, you've prepared a couple of deep breathing and calming exercises. And so you could say to the kids, okay, we're going to take a minute and do a deep breathing exercise. And that's going to be helpful. You can also ask for help from the counseling staff. And of course, you can talk about what has just happened. Remember that overall, kids are going to sort of run the gamut. There's going to be some kids who have been impacted, but not much less. You know, they will have been socially isolated, but maybe nobody lost a job, nobody got sick. So they were just bored, you know, and lonely. But they run the gamut from those less impacted kids to the really traumatized kids. The problem is we really don't know the proportion of kids in each of these groups. We don't know how many kids are going to be on the more serious end of the scale. Okay, let's look at a little bit of the past research from post-Hurricane Louisiana. And I want to talk about dwellers and avoiders, because this actually was a very big issue. This was research that was done after repeated hurricanes happened in Louisiana. The kids were pulled out of school for 3 or 4 months, and they came back to school. And when they came back to school, many of them had been quite traumatized. So many of them had houses that were demolished or destroyed, so they were all displaced. Some of them were homeless. Some of them, you know, their parents were ruined financially by this. So in some ways, it's similar to what we're facing, in that it was sort of a multi-layered trauma. Dwellers were kids who faculty and staff noticed wanted to sort of compulsively discuss the situation. They took every opportunity to hash over what had happened to them, what had happened to their neighbors, what they had seen, what they had gone through, or what was happening sort of broader in the state. Avoiders, on the other hand, were kids who felt extremely anxious at the thought of doing this, at the thought of these conversations. They didn't want any of these conversations. They felt very uncomfortable, and they wanted to avoid them at all costs. So how do you juggle the needs of both of these kids? And it's likely that every class is going to have dwellers and avoiders in the class. The main problem that seemed to come up was when dwellers would want to discuss this or want to bring the past events into the school situation. And avoiders would show great anxiety at having to talk about this, or they would withdraw completely. So how do you handle that, those kinds of situations? First thing is that it's perfectly fine to point out that not everyone is going to want to talk about the day. To say, right now, we're not going to talk about the result of the pandemic in your town or in your family. It's okay to do that, to say to kids, we'll have other times to talk about this in the future. You can also point out a very specific times. You could say, we're not going to talk about this right now, but we are going to talk about it when the school counselor comes by today at 1 o'clock. We're going to have a conversation about this. So we will talk about it then, but we're not going to talk about it right now. Sometimes in order to focus, dwellers needed some kind of outlet. So they needed some kind of relief. They couldn't just shut up. So thinking about what kind of relief they need, you could send them to a school counselor, but you could also have them do something like journal writing. So you could have all the kids journal write, and you could say, if someone really wants to talk about it, they're a dweller, you can say to them, why don't you take a few minutes and relax in the back of the room and write in your journal about what you're thinking and feeling right now. And that seems to often help with these cases. It's very important that you don't force avoiders to confront things. That is very tricky psychologically, and that is best left to counseling staff or to people who have expertise in this, because kids can really have it can really re-traumatize kids. So you shouldn't force them to talk about it. And finally, remember that advisory is a place where we could potentially have these discussions. We are going to give you at the end of the links to a conversation guide that will be helpful. Okay, so when you look at the red flags that kids show, there were some red flags that were very common and some that were much less common. So let's look first at the ones that were very common in this research. First is depression. So that's where you see kids who have no reactivity, they're very withdrawn, they don't have any pleasure in activities, they have problems with attention, they seem really sad, obviously. Kids who are significantly anxious and worried. Some anxiety is probably going to be universal, but looking for anxiety that's really significant is important. The third other thing, which unfortunately was also found to be quite common, most likely in Louisiana, was kids aggressively acting out. In the past, we tended to respond to that as a disciplinary issue, and it may still be a disciplinary issue, absolutely, but I think we have to be psychologically sensitive this fall to the possibility that kids who are being aggressive are kids who are really reacting to the situation at hand. Okay, now, there are some things that were less likely to show up. So, for example, very unpredictable emotions. So, like, you're talking about, the recession, or people becoming sick and somebody laughs hysterically, or they just burst into tears sort of out of nowhere in a way that isn't really appropriate and it isn't really working. Sort of bizarre denials were also possible, but they were less likely. So a bizarre denial would be like, for example, let's say you knew a student had suffered a particular loss, but they completely denied that it ever happened. That would be kind of a bizarre denial. Then you have physical symptoms. These were all somewhat less likely. So that would be things like hair pulling or signs of cutting, students who seem very tired, who fall asleep in class. Remember, we're looking for sleeping and eating problems as well. Hypersensitivity or paranoia was also less common but possible, and excessive irritability. Kids who were just really take any roadblock at all. There are a number of signs of significant anxiety. The ones that you're most likely to see are kids feeling agitated or angry, kids struggling to pay attention, or having difficulty sort of managing their emotions. Those are the ones that we're most likely to see following this kind of situation. What kinds of coping skills can we do? I think one of the things that would be very helpful is for everybody their heads together and think of coping things in classrooms that will help. So for example, classrooms that have the space could set up sort of a relaxation area at the back where kids can sit and do a breathing exercise, or they can sit and journal or draw, or they can read a book, something that would sort of let them decompress a little if they're really struggling emotionally. The counseling staff also, of course, needs to be ready to help the kids with problems. And this is something I think that counseling staff knows, helping kids make plans, helping teachers think of interventions that are particular for that child, that are particularly helpful for that child. But of course, it's always good to remember that prevention is better than any cure. And anything you do that is going to sort of improve the general climate of the school, make it more sensitive, more positive, is going to help the kids adjust. So just a couple of plans. We have free curricula that you can utilize. Other SEL curricula that are free too. So Common Sense Media has curricula about screen use. The Anti-Defamation League has curricula about bias and diversity. And just so you know, I'll mention this again briefly. We're doing a pilot program in the fall. We're piloting a new bias and diversity curriculum, which is going to have training for teachers and coordinated lesson plans for kids in grades 6 through 12. And so that will be a resource too. Okay, so now we're at Labor Day weekend, or it's right before you're starting school. Just before day one, you're going to resend all your emails to parents. You're going to introduce yourself. This is really for everyone, by the way, teachers and administrators. You're introducing the counseling staff, making sure people know who to contact. You're giving the quick reference handout, remember, which is that handout you created over the summer, the one pager that says, here's what's new and here's who to contact. The email specifics to parents. Here's what your child needs to bring. They need to bring a mask. They may need to bring an extra mask. That. Here's what you're going to see. When you pull up to the school, there are going to be people there who are going to help the kids get inside, or whatever logistic changes are going to be new. Give parents guidance about coming in with their kids. How long can they stay? Do they have to leave? I think you should think about this. There are going to be some anxious parents who aren't going to want to leave. So you may need to say, school starts at 8:15 and we need all parents to exit the building by then. One of the ideas you can also do is have a parent meeting on the first day if you have time, and you may not have time, but have a parent meeting, maybe during the first week some morning, where parents can ask questions and things like that. Obviously guidance about logistics in the email, where they should drop off, where they should, maybe some ideas of where they can get face masks or gloves. Tell them to label their child's face masks. And you can also resend pictures of their teachers with and without masks, particularly for the younger kids. Okay. Day one, greetings are incredibly important. I cannot overemphasize this, how important greetings are. I think it is a good idea to make a fuss. We want to be really positive. So balloons are great. You should be so thrilled to have these kids back in school, and they should feel it. So you can have administrators at the front door, counseling staff in the foyer, greeting all the kids as they walk in, teachers in doorways, greeting all the kids as they come into the class. Greetings are incredibly important. Be prepared for nervous parents. Think about a handout. Have extra copies of the handout so you can give it to them. Think about how long they can stay. Make sure every teacher has a copy of the red flag cheat sheet, which gives them the symptoms to look for. And really consider having the school, the counseling staff, go around from classroom to classroom and introduce themselves to the kids. So the kids know who they are. And they're much more likely to come in and say, I'm feeling, a little scared or anxious if they've already met the person. So you don't want the counseling staff to be strangers. So have them go around from class to class and introduce themselves. At the end of day one, do a little positive reinforcement. Send an email out. You can acknowledge any problems. If there was a traffic backup, you can talk about that and how you're going to try to address it. But really be positive. Say, look, we were thrilled to have the kids back. Overall, we might have had a few problems, but overall, it went really, really well. And we're just really excited to have everybody back in it, and things went great. After day one, keep introducing yourselves through the classrooms. I'm assuming you were not going to be able to do that all on the first day. Think about discussions, and this is some guidance about how to do these discussions, but there is a download, so I'm not going to go through it all right now. It's all in the download. And it's really just a discussion guide for teachers. So you can begin talking about these issues with kids in a way that will be helpful. Other things you can download. So you can download the discussion guide. You can download the red flag behaviors. Like I said, we're going to have a MARC video, which I apologize isn't there yet. We're going to have this new curriculum, and you can participate in that as a pilot. The pilot schools will get the curriculum for free, and we're going to study the efficacy of it during the pilot. So if you do the pilot, you get the curriculum, but you also have to answer a few questions about how it went and if you thought it was effective or interesting. We also have other downloads that you can use online. Those of you who are familiar with our center know that we try to put stuff online, give it away. So we have an online needs assessment guide. We have surveying services. We have 3 curricula that you can use. And if you go to our website, we have a web page on the site that is devoted specifically to the pandemic, to COVID-19, and you'll be able to click on these to download any of them. They're all free. All right. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful. And I am going to now go back and Megan, you can unmute yourself and begin talking. She is.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So we had a couple questions come up. A lot of people asked about the idea of self-care for staff and how do we take care of ourselves during these times. And I think that's actually kind of related to another question that came up. What do schools do whose counseling staffs were cut and who won't have the number of counselors on or won't have the people there? So I think these are kind of 2 related questions. So how do we take care of ourselves? And how do we also fulfill the need when we don't have the same staff that we've had in the past?
Okay. I think that's, how am I coming across? Can everybody hear me? All right.
Yeah.
I think those are actually great questions. I think self-care is incredibly important. Remember that we're not going to be able to help kids if we're not functioning well. So it's really important to remember that you're a human being and that you have to relax. You have to learn how to take care of yourself. You want to carve out some time for yourself. Nobody is going to handle these situations perfectly. Nobody, no parents, no educators. This is all new. And so we're all going to do the best we can. And I think it's really important to allow ourselves to figure things out as we go along and to really take good care of ourselves and to take care of our own mental health. And I think that's actually an incredibly important. I can't believe I forgot it, but it's a great point. It's a great point. What else have you got, Meg?
The other big question is any suggestions, I think, which again, like I said, was related to this a little bit, but this idea, it was brought up that some districts are going to be facing some unprecedented cuts in staffing, whether that's teacher staffing or counseling staff, and if there were any suggestions specifically for that situation.
Well, it's great timing, not. And it's a great question. The truth is, this is going to be so different everywhere that I'm not sure anything I would say would be of particular help, except use every resource that you have in a school. So you may have health and wellness teachers. You may have teachers who are being used in some capacity, but actually do have expertise in health and wellness or in counseling staff. So try to share the load as much as you can. If you have a health and wellness teacher that can help classroom teachers, for example, develop breathing exercises or something like that, let them do that so that the counseling staff can focus on other things. But obviously, I know this is going to be very challenging. And one of the things we do in MARC, because we're a shoestring operation as well, is we put as much as we can online. We put everything online, and that has enabled us to do a lot. So really use technology. Put stuff online, use email communications. All of that is cheap or free, and it's a way to get across to a lot of people really quickly.
And I was just going to step in and say too, I think that one of the things we forget is there are a lot of little things we do every day that might not feel like this is what a counselor would do, but even just kind of checking in with kids on a daily basis and the little kind of everyday, the greetings that you talked about, those kinds of things I think also make a big difference. So in schools where you're facing these types of cuts, remembering that you're probably doing a lot more SEL than you think you are, right? Just by being present and, smiling when they come in the door and remembering, I think that can be part of self-care too, is giving ourselves the credit we deserve for the hard work we're putting in. So I think that's kind of a double whammy of remembering that it might not be the huge stuff, it might be the small stuff where we can really make a big difference for a kid. So
I think that's an excellent point. I really do. And by doing some of the small stuff, you may head off some of the big stuff. So if you really go all out to greet the kids, you may lower their anxiety level enough that you're just not going to hear from some of the kids you might hear from otherwise. So it's it's really an ounce of prevention. So it's always better to prevent, right, than to have to intervene. So I think Meg's point is excellent. Meg, what else do you have?
I think that really covers the questions, and I'm just kind of looking through the chat, and I know this last comment is that, we need to prioritize our mental and physical health. Burnout is real, and I think that is very true. And again, I would say if we talk about the idea of buddy systems, even if it's not something that you feel will be implemented easily in your school, to think about sharing with colleagues, the people that are your friends, like, what am I doing every day to take care of myself? Even if you start, an email back and forth of like, hey, today I, took 5 minutes on my way to work to just listen to a song that I really liked, or I, did a couple deep breaths when I was in the bathroom instead of rushing back to get to the classroom or something like that. Those, again, I think we forget that small little strategies make a really big difference. And sharing those with each other is probably a way that I know I've found in my teaching and in my work over the past months to be really helpful. Like, what are you doing? Oh, what a great idea. I never would have thought about taking 5 minutes, whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, I think too. One of the questions I'm noticing is they're saying, is there an indication that you can do with your hands about smiling? And actually, I was going to say that the heart sometimes works for that. So I realize the heart is saying a heart, but it's kind of like a smile, and that's something that you might be able to show kids. I think that people can tell usually when you're wearing a mask when you smile because of your eyes. So I think they can usually tell your eyes change when you smile, and your eyes are still visible. But that's a legitimate question. And boy, we're all just going to have to feel our way through this and see how things go. I'm less concerned about the mask issue and smiling and things with the older kids. I'm a little more concerned about it with the younger kids. But hopefully, we're going to all figure out a way to do this. I do think that schools too should get lots of extras of everything. So I think schools should have extra masks, and kids are going to lose them and drop them and break them, and so I think we're going to need to be prepared for that.
I think it might also be useful, again, I think Eve, following up on that point with younger kids, to have really pointed conversations about what are the things to look for to know someone's smiling with a mask on, right? It's the same way that we name emotions for little kids. We are going to help them see emotions now. That's what we're going to do. And there might be some really pointed and specific lessons based on what does it look like when someone's smiling with a mask? What does it look like when someone is not? And working on bringing those things into the classroom, I think, is another part of social and emotional learning that we're all being forced to figure out, unfortunately, in these times.
I think that's a great point, and I can envision right off the top of my head sending kids a picture of myself smiling with a mask on and not smiling, and saying to them, "What are the differences between these two photos? Can you see the differences? There are differences," and that kind of deliberate teaching. Hopefully, we won't have to be in this position for long. I'm hopeful that kids are going to adjust back in to new realities. And but I suspect that for this coming academic year, this is what life is going to be like, and I think it will all do better um, to do that. We have 2 minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions that they have,
I don't think we see any last
I
minute
don't see any.
questions.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was useful, everybody. It was a daunting task. I won't lie. This was the more I thought about this issue, the more complicated it became. And but hopefully this has been helpful. And I've given you some thinking about really practical steps that you can take to do this. The recording of this will be up online. And as I said, I'm preparing a written version of it as well. If people just want like a book that they can reference different ideas, that will be available. Everybody have a great week and a great summer. And everybody go outside now and relax. Hopefully you're not more anxious. Thanks again for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so much.